Welcome back to Don't Be Strangers, a podcasting community against adult loneliness. I'm your host, Xinyi, and typically I meet my guests for the very first time while recording. So if this sounds fun or interesting to you, please consider applying to guest on a future podcast episode. So to be real, last year was not a good podcast year. I think I have shared and the little voice blogs that I typically attach to the end of each episode, some personal problems that I was going through, and then also just going really hard on the marketing for the retreat that we hosted last year, which I still need to share content for, but I'm not gonna beat myself up for the fact that it's been highly delayed. But I think what was really encouraging was the fact that applications for this podcast were still trickling in at the end of 2024, despite all that, which is a lovely reminder that sometimes projects don't really require high effort so long as you just slowly keep chugging along. Because I cannot tell you the number of times that, like, my friends have told me, like, wow, you're going really strong with Don't Be Strangers. I see you posting all the time. When in actuality, I think to myself, I'm like, I feel like I post like once a month, legitimately, but maybe it is just resharing stories, advertising like events and stuff, and just having this ongoing community of volunteers that help with the events that it feels like things are chugging along smoothly, even when mentally it is not. But anyways, I say all that to give you some context of how I met Jamie. So she took a chance and reached out, and I think through a previous podcast episode where she was following one of the guests, found out about the podcast. So thank you, Jamie, for keeping this podcast alive. And to anyone who still like listens and continues to support and reach out, because obviously at the beginning of this podcast, I had to go seek guests, and now it's feeling like the guests are organically reaching out to be on the podcast. Anyways, so based on first impressions, I will say that Jamie is highly intelligent, very sharp, thoughtful, and loves challenging herself. You'll understand why once you hear this conversation. But today we get to talk about how we got into tech as women, working remotely and what role it plays in community connection and loneliness, how to ask for help on the professional and personal level, Jamie's book that she published herself called The Seven Signposts, Find Your Direction in Life's Foundational Decisions, and how her communication and connection style has evolved over her career and pivots. So with that, I present to you, Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hillman Knight. I am, let's see, a Dallas local. I've been here. I moved here in 2017, so we're coming up on, what is that, 8 years. I'm originally from a super small town south of Birmingham, Alabama. Went to the University of Alabama. I got my bachelor's and my master's in management information systems, which, if you have no idea what that is, most people don't. It's basically like if you grabbed computer science out of the engineering school and dropped it into the business school. So learned how to write code, run technology projects, but with all of the kind of core curriculum of business. So after I graduated, I came out here to Dallas and started working as a technology consultant. And in my capacity as a technology consultant and then kind of transitioning to a management consultant, I have done quite a variety of things. So everything from hands-on keyboard, writing code at an enterprise level, to running an acquisition project, and running a project for custom app development. So quite the variety there. And I also, as a consultant, you get the experience of working in a ton of different businesses. So you're kind of dropped into different companies and different industries. You're working with different technologies. The teams that you're working with are different. The clients that you're working with are very different. And so I had quite a rapid fire experience. Really see quite a lot of variety out in the world, out in corporate America. So I did that at two different companies over, I think it was about 4 years. And then I went back to the University of Alabama and taught there in the Management Information Systems program. So I did that for a year and then came back to Dallas. And also during that time, I started really exploring my entrepreneurial pursuits, I guess. And I wrote a book during that time and really just started getting connected to this desire that I have to, help people and teach people in all of the ways and all of the things that I really wish I had been able to find, and the book that I wish that I had been able to read when I was just starting my professional career. So really started that kind of in tandem with teaching, did a little bit more consulting work. And then in August-ish of this year, really recommitted back to that entrepreneurial journey and founded Career Brilliance, which is a platform all about boosting people's business savvy and helping them cross more things off their to-do list so they can fast track their path to leadership and also enjoy their work days more. So that's really where I am today. And I'm really excited to chat with you.
Thank you so much, and I love the depth of the of the context that you provided. There's like so much that I want to ask you, but as promised, you get to ask first.
Yes, absolutely. I found it interesting because as I was listening to some of your other episodes, you are also a technology based person. So we have both been women in technology, which is, there's not very many of us. So I'm really curious to know, as we think about our experiences with being women in technology as our quote unquote day job, and then we have started things on, that are focused more on purpose and connection and this personal development side of things. So I'm curious to hear kind of about your journey and if you think, or, how do you feel? Do you think that the world of technology kind of enabled us to pursue these things, or this was a gap that we were feeling and so we've pursued these things on our own to try to fill that gap, or somewhere in the middle?
I think personally, I've always had an interest in technology growing up, and I think that stemmed originally, ironically, from this like online platform for people to play games called Neopets. Don't know if
Okay.
you're familiar with it, but anyways, as a child in elementary school, a friend introduced me to this, and you can just like make friends online and like play little games.
Mm-hmm.
And it was through that like I discovered about making web pages, because in that like community and platform you could customize pages, like how you can customize your page on Tumblr back in the day, and then like
Mm-hmm.
also like MySpace also back in
Yeah,
the day,
MySpace.
like
Yep.
these pages where you could like experiment with HTML and CSS. So
Mm-hmm.
in elementary school, that was sort of my introduction. So introduction into technology and the ability to manipulate technology. So I wasn't really thinking about, obviously as a child, any gaps to fill, but I saw it as like a creative outlet, especially on the front end user interface graphic design
Mm-hmm.
element, like being able to design things in a different way. So like from instead of like designing things on paper, instead of like drawing it out, you had to like create these colors and designs through lines of code. And I thought that was interesting because at my core, I'm an artist. And so I was like, okay, this is just another way that you can like do creative expression.
Mm-hmm.
So that ultimately led me into my day job, which is like a software engineer. And ironically, like I don't actually enjoy as much the design element anymore. I prefer like the data manipulation. And
Cool.
so long story short, I didn't really see any like gaps to fill. I just thought it was interesting. Later in my life, I did get into like a computer science course, and there was a lot of like interesting problem solving
Mm-hmm.
in that class that I thought that in some ways paralleled like puzzle solving. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, so this form of puzzle solving is interesting to me because I've also like grown up playing a lot of video games that were like puzzle solving based. So I was like, this is
Mm-hmm.
just another variation of this. In some ways, it's kind of like gaming to me. I've kind of like gamified my relationship to like engineering. So in terms of being a woman in technology, this was not intentional. I wasn't like being like, oh, I want to be this person, but it was just like growing up, somehow all of these elements led me
Mm-hmm.
into being a woman in technology. What about you? How did you end up in technology? Like, how did you even pick that field of study in college?
Yeah, so very similar kind of childhood experience. I was always the one in my family, even as a kid, who would like be tech support. Like I could figure out how to make the TV work and I could, this was back when you had 14 different remotes for everything. And I was the one who could like make the computer do what it needed to do. So I was always just very inclined to that. When I went to college, I was dead set on going to law school. So I was
Oh,
actually a communication studies and political science double major.
okay.
And the I don't know what this says about me, but the classes weren't hard enough for me. I'm very much like a puzzle person like you where I was like I just like I want more of a challenge and I had heard about the MIS program and I had come across it in a couple of different ways. Like there were more than one time when I had a conversation with somebody and they were like, yeah, I'm in this great program. It's called MIS. And so there was just something, I didn't have all the information, but there was just like a gut feel that was like, this feels like a really good fit. And it was over the winter break that I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to switch my major to do but I have never written a line of code outside of, customizing my MySpace profile when I was in 7th
Okay.
grade. And so I did I like went online, found like an HTML course and just like maybe it was like hour of code or something like that that was just like very basic. And I was like, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can figure this out. And so switched in last minute. They actually like when I first tried to enroll, they said that the class was full. And so they were like, oh, you're gonna have to wait until next semester. And I was like, oh, that's a bummer. And then somebody dropped out of the class and they were like, hey, just kidding, you're in. And so I was like, great, let's go. So that I feel like I kind of fell into it that way. But then once I was in it, I mean, it was the first time that I was like very willingly. I remember on like an early Saturday morning laying in bed and like working on one of my assignments just to see what all I could do and what all I could create with it. And it just being such a fun puzzle thing from there. And then, as I started to learn more about where technology and business meet, it's like technology is absolutely a critical tool for where business is going. And so this feels like a really foundational skill set for how businesses are going to have to be able to, you know, earn revenue, reduce costs, and pursue their mission, which is what businesses are all about.
Yeah. So that explains how you got into technology, but what about business and entrepreneurship? Like, was that also just something that was intrinsic to your personality or developed
So,
later?
yeah, so it's always funny, you hear like the Sarah Blakeleys of the world, and they're like, yeah, I started selling, lemonade at 6 years old or whatever. I was not that way. And I even had, for a long time, I thought, well, no, that doesn't, I don't know that kind of lifestyle would be good for me. Like I do well in more of like a structured environment. And then COVID happened and everybody had to work from home. And that was kind of my first taste of a going to the office 9 to 5 every day experience. And I was like, wait a second. I feel great. I love having this autonomy, this flexibility. Like I get to set my schedule more. And also during those first few years right out of college, for me at least, was a massive time of self-discovery. And I kept finding over and over again that I really valued freedom and autonomy and being able to make my own choices and do what really mattered to me. And also, I wanted to feel like I was making a contribution to the world and like making the world a better place in what I was doing. And there were times in my consulting roles and even in my teaching roles that I was like, I don't know if this is it.
Mm.
And so it really just kept coming back to, I think I'm just gonna have to work for myself. If I There are these things that I want to do and the way that I want to do them, and the only answer that I can find right now is let me just try this on my own. And I'm certainly open to, changing that at some point, but that's where we've landed.
So it sounds like the impact that you want to do is like sort of tied to the education piece and hence like career brilliance,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's all about I have I don't know, a passion, I guess. It's around empowering other people. And, I want to be their biggest cheerleader and their biggest advocate and like giving other people the tools and the strategies that they need to be successful in whatever it is that they want to do and whatever it is that's going to make them feel happy and fulfilled in their lives. I want to give them the tools to make that happen. Um, I have come at it from a bunch of different angles at different points, but that's really kind of at the heart of it. And specifically, I have a very sweet spot in my heart for women, specifically women in leadership roles, women in technology roles. We need more representation of women. We just do. Companies function better when they have more women in leadership roles. Products Technology products are better when you have women on your team. Like there is data to back this up. And it's just the right thing to do. We have a lot of smart women who need to be in these roles. So, career brilliance is for everybody, absolutely. But I have an extra special spot for my women.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely feel a lot of parallel in kind of like harkening back to something that you said earlier in valuing autonomy and
Mm-hmm.
independence. It's also something that I highly value for myself. And I think it leads perfectly into both our passions to empower other people as well. And I think, yeah, now that I'm just like thinking out loud, that makes perfect sense because what I'm trying to do with Don't Be Strangers is to empower people to elevate their own social health, their own social
Mm-hmm.
circles through self-awareness. So like digging inward to better connect outwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you have a deeper level of introspection, you actually gain more independence because you start to sort out
Mm.
like what is it that you actually want versus what other people are telling that you should want. Either it's like society, family, your peers, and once you understand what you actually want, having the agency to implement that in your social life, which, everything in life is tied together, your career, your social life, your hobbies,
Absolutely.
your like general health, right? Your mental health, your physical health, spiritual health, all of it is tied together. So I think that's really cool. I think that's
Yeah.
really cool that we have like parallel missions,
Mm-hmm.
just targeting, I guess, like different compartments
Yeah,
in
yeah,
people's
but
lives. Yeah.
it absolutely is all connected. And I think you make an excellent point of there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. And you can be by yourself and still feel really connected to yourself. And I totally agree that that is a huge part. As I was reflecting and getting ready for this conversation, just thinking about when I have felt the most lonely has been the times when I feel disconnected from myself, in addition
Mm,
to feeling disconnected from other people. But it very often starts with I don't feel connected to me, and I don't feel like I can be, at home when I'm alone.
right.
And
Yeah.
when I can do that, it's like, okay, that gives me the confidence and the self-awareness that I need to then go out and connect with other people. And then it becomes this beautiful kind of self-reinforcing cycle of, I find more about myself when I'm with other people who bring
Yeah.
out the best in me. And so it's that kind of that cycle.
Yeah. Wait, is this your answer to the question, what's your relationship with
Yeah.
loneliness?
Yeah, yeah, that was what I was thinking about.
Yeah, yeah. Did you have any more to add to that, or was that? So I'm going to interrupt right here to say that if you have not already, please pause to give this show a follow and a rating. Or if you've already done that, which thank you so much, longtime listener, have you heard anything that we've talked about that reminds you of a loved one or a friend? Maybe you can pause to shoot them a text with this podcast episode and let them know that this reminded you of them. Word of mouth is so powerful, and I thank you so much for helping with the reach of who this podcast can help.
As I was thinking about it, when I was thinking about when I was the most lonely, that's really what first came up for me. And that really was that time period right after I moved to Dallas. So left, the state that I had known forever, moved out here, new job, new city, new state. I was with a partner at the time who ended up not being a good fit for me.
Okay.
So, so that, in a lot of ways, part of, well, that's a whole
Yeah.
big can of worms. But, the person who, in a lot of ways, I was looking to be an anchor of connection for me was not what I needed. And I was probably not what they needed. But again, broader, longer story for another day.
Right, 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 right.
But so much of that time, it really goes back to that. I did not feel connected to myself. Like I felt completely untethered. And it really sparked this journey of exactly what you said, the self-introspection and the personal discovery of who am I and what do I care about and what are my values and what are the different ways that I actually can do life.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Like, what are my options? I mentioned I grew up in a super small town in Alabama. It's hard for me to describe how small it was, but one of the things that I point to is like, I did not know it was a thing that people could go to college out of state. Like
Mm,
it just never, that's how small the world was for that community. Was like it just never even occurred to me that that was something you could do, or that something that people did. I applied to Alabama, I got in, I got a great scholarship, and I was like, this is it. Like I've made it. This is as big as you can possibly go unless you do something absolutely crazy like an Ivy League. But
yeah.
I'm not going to do that. And so it's, oh my gosh, I got completely off. Where was I going with that story? I think so just, coming out to Dallas, there's so much here. And I think in a lot of ways, just trying to figure out what are all of these different ways that people can live their lives.
Yeah.
What are all of the options? Because there are so many ways to live your life and to structure your life, and types of work that you can do and types of relationships that you can have and the hobbies that you can do, and all of that. There's so many options, and it's
Yeah.
really just up to you to, one, know that the options are there, and then two, know that you want to do that and then go
Right.
and do it. So that whole big journey of, I read so many books and listened to so many podcasts and all of that, took every personality test. So if you want to geek out about personality
Yeah.
tests, like I could do that. And that's really what then became my book. Was I
Mm.
took all of that and I was like, okay, can I give someone a literal roadmap to say, I've read everything. You don't have to read everything. If you want to, you can. But here's one book that really gives you these 7 basically starting points, for you to go through and just start to understand and to think about, okay, I have different options here, and start to ask yourself those questions of, what actually feels good to me? What do I want? What aligns with my values? And in doing that, learning how to decide for yourself and trust for yourself, because that really, at the end of the book, of course, I want you to have these beautiful grand takeaways of like, yes, now I know these particular, answers to these questions. But I also want you to know, now you know how to make decisions for yourself. And that is a skill set that you will carry with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you're just like singing to the choir. Like, I align with this so much. Also, what you said about not even knowing the other possibilities of how life could be lived is part of the reason why I love talking with strangers. I love meeting new people, why I do this podcast, because there are just things that, based off of your upbringing and context, ideas that cannot even cross your mind. And that's what I'm really curious about is like, what are thoughts I haven't even thought of
Hmm.
that I can only access through someone else's context, right? Because they have this thought, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Since you already brought up your book, I would love to
Yeah.
hear a little bit more about it. Like,
Sure.
what are these seven signposts? Yeah, right, signposts.
Yes. So the name of the book is Seven Signposts: Find Your Direction in Life's Foundational Decisions. And the way that it is structured is each one of these seven signposts, there is a foundational decision about how you want to go about your life. And the thing is, when, again, I've read a bunch of the books, I've listened to a bunch of the podcasts. People generally agree that these seven areas are very important for you building a life that feels good to you. What they don't agree on is how to actually make that happen. So, what the book does is it introduces a concept and then it talks you through the two different, kind of most commonly debated paths, and then gives you lots of exercises to help you determine which one works best for you, or maybe you're somewhere in the middle, or maybe it's, something totally different. So, the seven are managing your energy, embrace your passion, define your timeline, explore your self love, flourish in your relationships, invest your money, and achieve your goals. So, the one that I, like to talk about to kind of illustrate this is around passion. So, almost everybody agrees that having passion in your life is important. That is a key ingredient to having a happy, vibrant, thriving life, right? So what they don't agree on is passion innate? Are you born with your passions, the things that you care about? And therefore, to live a passionate life, you need to follow your dreams, right? Follow your passions. The other camp says that passion is developed over time through repeated practice. You develop a passion for something that you've gotten really good at, and that is your path to having passion in your life and having all of the benefits therein. So those are two very valid different paths. And so what the book does is it kind of explains both of those more in depth, and then you've got some great exercises at the end of each chapter to help you discover which one fits best for you.
I think that's so cool that you don't make it prescriptive, that you allow people to explore like the two, kind of like the nature versus nurture. That's
Mm-hmm.
the example that you just gave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, to see
Yeah.
like, do you already have passion inside of you? And if not, like, can you develop it?
Right.
And just making it very open-ended. I really, really love that. Also, I guess it just goes back to our value for independence, right? Like,
Yeah.
it
Right.
doesn't feel good if someone's just like, this is the only way that you can do things. And like, if
Mm-hmm.
you don't do it like this, then you're not going to find your passion. You're like,
Yeah.
what? Like, it just feels
I
too
would.
restrictive when
Yep.
someone tells you, like, this is the only way they can do it to like arrive at the end goal.
Let's talk about maybe working remotely. I'm
Mm.
curious to hear your thoughts on that. So, what role do you think working remotely plays in dynamics of connection, community, loneliness, all of the things?
I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Just
Hmm.
like most things. One, a lot of autonomy, right? Like, not being removed from the office environment and therefore having a bit more control of your life, of your time. can go
Mm-hmm.
both ways. Like, one, I've seen plenty of people where work took over their life after we went remote because it was just like, well, my office is like my bedroom, right? And so there's not a hard division of like, I've left the office and therefore it's time to stop working, but I just now work from being like a 9 to 5 to like 24/7. Like I'm just
Mm-hmm.
always working. So there's that camp. And then the other camp is like, yeah, having more freedom and being able to say like, okay, well then like maybe now I can interject a walk into my workday and I can just do that for myself and that makes me feel good and then ultimately makes me more productive. But then of course the double-edged sword goes into the isolation of and versus your social health because
Mm-hmm.
one being in the office having that, I guess you could say, what is the term that I'm looking for? Just being given a social context on a daily basis by being able to go into an area where there are people that you can connect with
Mm-hmm.
makes makes your social life easier in certain regards in that you don't have to plan for it as much because
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, I'll at least get to talk to my coworkers about job things, even if it doesn't go into like vulnerable personal life dynamics. So you can fulfill some social needs in that regards without high effort. But then on the other hand, like being able to work remotely is having the option to see if your friends are also working remotely, see your friends more
Mm-hmm.
by just choosing to work remotely with your friends, right? To like parallel play and be like, let's just co-work at a coffee shop together, let's co-work at my house or at your house. You can work in a completely different field at a different company, like, and we can just bond by body doubling each other, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
by having someone else to keep me accountable on what I need to get done and vice versa. So, long story short, like I feel like it really depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
Like case by case. For some people, I think remote is like brilliant. That's exactly what they need to round out their life. And for other people, that is actually very distracting and very isolating to not have that social community from the work
Mm-hmm.
setting. You already mentioned yourself that you have really enjoyed remote and therefore was like part of the push towards becoming an entrepreneur was to have like more autonomy, right? Are
Mm-hmm.
you now a full-time entrepreneur or do you still do
Yes.
part-time? Okay.
Yeah. Now I am full time. The last role that I had immediately before this was hybrid.
Okay.
It was part time and hybrid.
Yeah.
So I was working 1 to 2 days a week in the office and then 1 to 2 days a week at home.
Yeah.
And so
How do you feel about remote work? Obviously you love it, but like
I do, yeah. And I'm completely with you where it's like, yes, and I think hybrid really ended up being the best solution because I mean I think I am such a super introvert too in the true like classic introvert definition of when I am around other people, it is draining to me. And when
mm,
I'm by myself, it is energizing.
mm,
And so, that is true of almost everybody in the world. And so just being able to be by myself was very recharging for me by working from home. And then we also have, I'm able to manage much more of my own time and I can take a walk in the middle of the day and I can cook food in my own kitchen and all of those sorts of beautiful perks. And seeing people on a regular basis and having that in person interaction, there really is, there's no substitute for it.
yeah,
And, I am still a big advocate that even if you are working remotely, you can make meaningful connection with your coworkers. You can have, I mean, we're having a fantastic conversation right now. We're not in the same room.
right.
Um, and that's a lot harder to do. You have to be really, really intentional about it. It doesn't happen on accident, quote unquote, nearly as much as it does when you're in person.
Yep, yep,
And so I think, especially if you are like new to working and you don't have existing relationships, and you also have not had a lot of practice in building professional relationships, that can be really, really hard. But I think if you have really strong relationships with your team already and you know how to continue to develop those and nurture those, then like, yeah, that seems, it depends on the person, it depends on the context, it depends on all of the things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So now that you work remotely full time, how do you fulfill your social needs, your like community needs?
I am working on that.
Okay.
That's yeah, I also as part of kind of this pivot were also some health things, and I'm happy to talk more about those. But one of my most annoying and persistent symptoms is just chronic fatigue. So I'm just
Mm,
tired a lot,
mm, yeah,
and I'm really working on it.
yeah.
And that is one thing where it's like, okay, I'm really trying now to pursue more things where I am intentionally connecting with other people, and I am not naturally attuned to meeting new people, and that's very much outside of my comfort zone. So it's like it has been very much a delicate balance of, okay, let me stay connected to me, let me stay connected to my few good friends that I have. And then once I get, on the other side of this, it's like, okay, I'm going to do more. I'm going to reach out more and be more plugged in. I really want to be, deeply integrated into a local community and those sorts of things. So that's on 2025's goals.
Yeah, yeah, baby steps. Baby
Yes.
steps definitely. No, I was
Yes.
just like curious too, especially I'm always interested in people's perspectives on moving to a new city and like having to build their community from
Hmm.
ground zero um as well. But yeah, I think like given that you're super introverted and recharged like being alone, then it's like okay, this all makes sense, that it's like
Yeah.
obviously it's going to take like a little bit more
Hmm.
to fill that out. But it is my passion, so I always ask people. I'm
I
always
love it. Yeah.
like where are you at in your community building stage, and like how do you
Hmm.
feel about it, and also making people aware that they can have goals in their social life, because I think that's not something that people think about, right? That's not like I would like to have 3 best friends. Or like people don't think of goals in this way. They think like I want to develop in my painting skills, or like
Right.
I want to move up in the corporate ladder. Like these seem like very definite because
Hmm.
we've kind of been taught like this is how goal setting goes, but no one's like ever really conscious about like their social life, or like being like, oh, I want to get rid of my I want to get rid of some toxic friends. Like people don't set sort of these goals, right, where you're like, okay, well then if I have that goal, then what does a toxic friend mean? Who, like, does anyone in my social circle fit this, or maybe not, or maybe there's no one to
Hmm.
eliminate, and like yeah, just having that awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Some of the goals that I have set, let's see, that I'm thinking about in this vein. So this might be interesting to other people who are trying to set their own goals. So I want to become a regular at a coffee shop. Like I
Cute.
want to be able to walk in and like the barista like knows my name and knows what I want to order. It's probably going to be a lavender almond milk latte almost every time. So that's pretty easy. That's one. I want to be like somebody's go to, like, hey, will you drive me to the airport? Like, I
Cute.
want to be somebody's like errand friend. Like, I just want to be able to like help you with your life.
Yeah.
So that was one. Gosh, I had another one. I can't remember. They're written down somewhere.
These are
But
so wholesome, and the fact that you have them written down is, like, so
mhm,
sweet. I feel like the errand friend thing is so cute because, like, every time my friends move, like, I always offer to, like, help pack and, like,
mhm,
move things and, like,
mhm,
unpack, like, and none of my friends have ever taken up this offer because I understand, like, all grown up in this, like, hyper independent American hustle
mhm,
culture, so it's like, why would I ask my friend to do this when I can just hire someone? Like, I'm financially independent enough to like not be a
mhm,
burden onto anyone. But I'm like, no, I feel like there's a lot of value in the vulnerable act of like asking for help And like being able to meet your friends' needs like this, like it doesn't always have to be a deep conversation over coffee, but it can just be like a very casual, yeah, like an errand, right? Like being like,
Mm-hmm.
let's go grocery shop together.
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
something very, very casual that's like that allows you to live life together instead of constantly catching up on life, you know?
Ooh,
Yeah,
I
because
like
I feel like
that.
a lot of the meetups that people have right now are like, let's get dinner and like tell each other what has
Uh-huh.
happened, but not a lot of like feel like it's important to also create shared experiences, right? The shared experiences of like, you know, taking your friend to the airport and like being
Mm-hmm.
like showing up when they're sick. What else? Like just anything else.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be intentional about like creating these experiences in my own social life. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I wrote that down. When you were talking about the like asking for help, there's a really interesting, I think it was a study that was done that basically concluded that people tend to overestimate the level of a burden of asking you to do something and underestimate people's willingness to do whatever it is that you've asked them for help on. So like in general, people want to help. They're thrilled that you asked, them to help. But when you are the one asking for help, like it just feels like, oh, I don't want to bother them. Like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
people, we just really underestimate people's willingness to extend help.
I've definitely heard of this study as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. So my strategy for asking for help is always giving people the out.
Ooh,
Just
nice.
being like, "Hey, Jamie, like, could you, like, maybe help me with this?" But of
Mm-hmm.
course, if you don't have time, if you don't
Right.
want to, that's totally okay too. That's like,
Uh-huh.
I always like end my ask with this, like, but like, I have to try because I want to see where this friendship could go. Like,
Mm-hmm.
could we become the errand friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like some people are just like not down for that, and then like you'll get that like when once they like reject, but like it doesn't feel as bad because I already gave them the out. Like I already gave them
Right.
permission to reject. I'm just like,
Uh-huh.
I'm not gonna hold it against you if you can't or
Right.
don't want to do this. Like it's just an open invite to
There you
do
go.
some life things together or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
just more chill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because I've spent a lot of time thinking kind of from the professional lens of
Mhm.
how do you effectively ask for help
Mhm.
um in a way that you know gets you the help that you need but also doesn't put people in a weird position or anything like that. And having the graceful out is definitely one of those components. And then also just like making it as easy as possible for somebody to say yes. So instead of, hey, do you want to, hang out sometime? It's like, hi, like I'm going to go to, the farmer's market on Saturday at 11. Would you like to join? And so it's like, hey, I've already done all of this work. And so it's like makes it easier for you to say yes or say no, but then say, actually, I can't do Saturday, but I can do Sunday, or I can't do 11, but I can do 9 or whatever. So that's an interesting kind of parallel. I hadn't really thought about that before.
Yeah, definitely that is amazing and that's very effective too because it takes the complexity of like the logistics of like hanging out. If you propose something more concrete, exactly as you said, instead of being like maybe in the next 5 years you'd like to
Right.
like have coffee once to being like,
Uh-huh.
how about next Saturday?
Hmm.
And then you can like actually start having a more collaborative conversation on like when is this coffee date gonna happen. Right, yeah. Yeah, so I have to ask you the question which
Yeah.
I ask everyone, which is how do you define a stranger and at what point do they transition from being one to not being one?
Let's see. I mean, defining a stranger is just someone you just don't know yet. And when they transition, as I was thinking about it, it was really there's a frequency component to it, there's a depth component to it, and then reliability was kind of my
Mm.
third piece. So frequency is just, this is someone who you have seen more than once. it's really hard to, take someone from a stranger to not a stranger if you only interact with them once.
Yeah.
And I think this is also where we see, coworkers become not strangers, right? Because we're
Right.
seeing them frequently. And so that's kind of one level. The next is depth. So when you are you talking, is it just the hi, how are you? Good, how are you? Okay, and now exchange is over. Or are you able to get kind of more into what's going on? And, even again, I'm coming back to your like living life together, not just catching up on life together.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that's so beautiful. So then that's kind of that depth component. And then the reliability piece. And this is where I've spent a lot of time thinking about, as I'm setting my community goals, is there's a sense of almost predictability of I have a friend who I always talk about the new season of Love Island with. I have a friend or I have, somebody who is always at the Saturday morning yoga class. And so it's every time I go into the coffee shop, it's the same barista and we're now not strangers anymore because there's a sense of anticipation.
Mm,
This person's going to be there. I know what to expect and then those expectations are met. And that really, I think in a lot of ways, and maybe that's above and beyond your question, is like then when it moves into like, okay, this person, I would consider them a friend
right. Yeah.
because there is that sense of reliability, of kind of that predictability piece to it. And I think this is also where, going back to our conversation about logistics, if there is something that is like structurally within your relationship that kind of removes that barrier of the logistics, I think that
Mm-hmm.
accelerates,
Yeah.
that connection. Because you don't have to wonder like, oh, when's the next time I'm going to see this person? Or do we have to play calendar tag to try to figure out when it's going to happen in the next 5 years? It's
Yeah.
just like, oh no, I see them every month at this volunteer thing or, whatever it is. So that kind of reliability, predictability, meeting expectations kind of piece of it seems like a really important component.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. I have never thought about this. The expectation that you can start to develop with someone once you feel like you have some sort of closeness to them. The
Mm-hmm.
degree doesn't have to be super close, but you've like moved out from the stranger phase, so then you're like, there are certain I know enough about you that I can like predict some very small aspects of like our
Mm-hmm.
interaction. I'll find you at the coffee shop because that's where you
Mm-hmm.
work and that's where I met you, sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And also I loved what you said about the having the structure in the logistics of like when and where you'll meet said friends or acquaintance so that you have the frequency aspect tied down. This is something that I have discovered to be very effective for keeping friendships going as an
Mm-hmm.
adult, is to just say like, hey, can we let's just lock something into our schedule like every week, bi-weekly, every month. Let's just have a call, a meetup, and just have that in our calendar, and it's just locked in. And if we need to move it, we'll move it. Like if a dentist appointment like, overlaps or something, we can cancel, we can just like decide the week of. But I really like that because then you just decide like who are the most important people that you want to have frequency with,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just don't have to do, as you say, the calendar tag
Yep.
game.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah,
also have my sister and I have a every other week call
that's so
on the
sweet.
calendar. So yes, same thing.
And while you're scrolling, I see there's one audience. I can't see who it is, but I just want to say hi. Thank you for being here. You could say hi in the chat if you're actually still actively watching and hearing this.
Okay. So there's kind of just two things that I want to touch on. One of them, so you asked a really great question around, and I don't have the full question in front of me, but over all of these different professional experiences that I've had, how has that shaped my communication and my connection style?
Mm-hmm.
And I I spent a lot of time thinking about that because it was such an interesting question. When I think back on all of the different professional experiences that I've had, I do tend to think about okay, it's been a bunch of projects, it's been a bunch of technologies, it's been a bunch of businesses and industries and, all of those things. But it's also been a lot of people. There have been a lot of people. And so I think what that has helped me understand and what has shaped my communication, my connection style is that people tend to be very consistent with their why, and they tend to be incredibly varied with their how.
Mm.
So almost everyone, when you ask them or when you really kind of dig into the why of what they're doing, everybody wants to feel like they belong. Everybody
Mm.
wants to feel like they're valued, like what they're doing matters. They want to feel seen. They want to feel heard. They want to feel like they can be successful.
Mm.
And the how of how they get to that is what is so different. And, people are just wired in different ways. Some people are wired for more big picture thinking. Some people are wired for more detailed thinking. And so when I think about approaching, especially in a professional setting, any situation, my brain always goes to like the tense situations or we're having a little bit of a problem that we have to solve. It's like, okay, how can I continue to honor their why? They want to
Mm.
feel seen. They want to feel heard. They want to feel valued. They want to feel like they're set up for success, while also, leaving room for understanding, how is this person thinking about this? What matters to them? What was their process to get to where they are? And how can I then adapt my style to meet, what they care about and how they're thinking about things, so that we can really get on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, like that, I have had lots of experiences where I've worked with lots of different people. And, that how there's one level where it's like, yeah, our brains are just different. How
Yeah.
we all solve problems is just a little bit different. How we think about things, what we value is all just a little bit different. And so if I were to go into every situation and be like, everybody thinks just like me, not only am I going to be, disappointed because we cannot have a world full of Jamies, that would not
Yeah.
make the world go around. But it also, if I go into it with that thinking, the way I think about things is the right way to think about things, then that does not leave room for, okay, and the way they think about it is also
Right.
valid most of the time.
Yeah.
The other layer to that, though, is sometimes people's how is unhealthy. So I have worked with people who have been just jerks to me. And it has taken a lot of work to be like, okay, I still can honor your why, which is you want to feel seen, heard, valued, like you matter, like you can be successful, even if the way you're trying to accomplish that is by being mean to me. And I think
Mm.
that we can have a different conversation, but that's it's not about me. If you're being a jerk to me, like you might not like me, but like I'm a generally like friendly person. So it's not a me problem.
Yeah.
That seems like a you problem. And I can see that your why is driving those kind of how quote unquote how
Mm.
behaviors. And so hopefully we can dig a little bit deeper
Yeah.
and find a different way to express that how and be friends. And I always, it would like become my mission to find, the one arrogant jerk and be like, all right, we're going to be friends by the end of this. You're going to like me and we're going to get along well. And I was successful for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. This reminds me of a book that I read earlier this year called Surrounded by Idiots. Have you heard
I
of
have
this book?
not.
It's like about like the four different communication styles that
Okay.
appear in like work settings.
Okay.
And what you're saying is just like resurfacing so many of these things that like I read from the book that's like where people the premise is that like people in the work environment, although it doesn't exclusively have to be the work environment, think that other people's are idiots based off of their
Mm-hmm.
like communication style and like exactly the how they want to get things done, and these like
Mm-hmm.
four distinct styles that people go that like drive people's how to
Mm-hmm.
accomplish this like basic why. That's awesome. I'm glad you like
Yeah.
looped back to that question because I was definitely like curious about it. And also
Yeah.
like as you were dissecting like the one way that in which like you've noticed yourself evolve over time to communicate and work with these clients of yours, I just kept thinking like, yeah, you're definitely a consultant because I also work in consulting. So I'm like, yeah, this is how you think. You
Yes.
become trained to think when you
Yep.
undergo so many different projects of like with various personalities
Mhm.
over time.
Yep.
I think that's so
Absolutely.
cool. And with that, thank you so much again, Jamie, for sharing your time and energy with us. I think it's really interesting how sometimes talking to someone who works in your own career or industry can give you insight into how you may have been trained to solve problems or think in certain frameworks just from having to solve similar issues. So this is how I felt like re-listening to this episode and conversation about my approach to consulting and life, or rather my approach to solving problems from the consultant's perspective. So I would love to know which topic we chatted about that resonated with you the most. Please write to us. All our contact information is linked in the description, and you can say hi to Jamie, say hi to me, or both of us. So just out of pure curiosity for myself, I decided to take a look at her book on her website. I know that in the conversation she already kind of did a very high level dive, but to review, the 7 signposts are how to manage your energy. One side is balancing priorities versus having weighted priorities. Number 2, embracing your passion. Side 1 is passion is innate. Side 2, passion is developed. This is the one we talked about. Signpost 3, defining your timeline. The one side is that your timeline is short. The other side is that your timeline is just right. Signpost 4, exploring your self love. Side 1 is self love is a mindset. Side 2 is self love is action based. Signpost 5, flourish in your relationships. Healthy relationships are hard work versus healthy relationships are easy. Signpost 6, invest your money. Side 1, invest in your future. Side 2, invest in yourself today. And signpost 7, achieving your goals. Motivations is key versus habits are the way. And I just wanted to say that I think with as much personal development as I do in terms of seeking resources to keep expanding the way that I can explore and play in life, I think that these are really cool perspectives. And I love that she pits these two sides for you to explore. So, if this sounds up your alley, consider checking out her book, which is linked in her website in the description below. So, looping back to her last signpost on goals, I think I'm starting to lean more towards building habits rather than just having motivation. Just like how habits have kept this podcast going for 64 episodes since it started in 2021, which, if you do the math, that's like maybe 1 or 2 episodes a month. Which is considered, I would say, like very slow. And in reality, it's not even 1 or 2 episodes a month. It's like a periods of where I'm consistently posting and then like periods of hiatuses. I think that despite the slowness of it all, it's opened up really interesting relationships and collaborations, allowed me to have access to conversations with interesting people whom I would have never met under normal circumstances, and allowed me to play in a different way in life, which, as you may have noticed, play is a huge like value of mine in terms of how I approach life. But that being said, I think it is a testament to how habits can really have powerful impacts over time if you just persist. So now I am starting to implement this idea of having a consistent habit with my creative outlet. So, with completing the artist way, which I have already talked so much about, so I'm not going to rehash yet another time. I have started creating YouTube videos again. This is just for myself, not related to Don't Be Strangers. And in just 1 month, I've been able to output 3 videos, which is quite high volume personally, but I've been able to achieve this through allowing myself to only edit an hour a day. And I've started to notice that when I actually restrict the amount of time that I allow myself to work on something, one, it combats burnout because I'm not going to pull an all-nighter to get a video or a project done. But two, it keeps me excited long term because I have something to look forward to the next day to do. So instead of saying, like, I'm going to only stop working on this video or project when I finish, I say, I'm going to stop working on this in 30 minutes and I will have more time tomorrow to work on it, another 30-minute or 1 hour chunk of time. In some ways, I think younger me would be extremely frustrated by this sort of limitation because, of course, who doesn't want to indulge in something that they find really fun for as long as they want? And I think there is value in that version too, in the let's go all out right now. But in terms of the marathon of life, I think I've noticed that when I work on things slowly through habits of saying, like, I will work on X every single day or as many days consecutively as I can, because sometimes every day is too daunting or not realistic, that I am able to make progress over a longer period of time. So, something that I want to challenge myself in February is to start posting more consistently on Instagram and other outlets to share my creativity. That's something that I also discovered through the Artist Way is something very important to me, not just to create and share my creations, because I have a deep-seated belief that part of what makes art is the communication aspect, as in that, yeah, it's great to enjoy the creation of it for yourself, but also I think personally it's important that the art gets received on the other end, that it is seen, regardless of how it gets interpreted by the audience. Because that you can't control. That's up to the audience or the individual receiving your art. So I want to post consistently. I'm feeling very anxious about this because I can feel resistance already. But as all things in life, I feel like resistance is a sign that that's the direction that you should go in. And it feels silly because it's just posting every day. So how could it be scary? But I think in my previous attempts to do everyday challenges, I have failed. So, in actuality, what I'm saying to myself is as many consecutive days as possible. And when I fall off, to just pick up and keep going, to share. I think this is I think it's all coming back to me now. What I was trying to get at earlier, to create art, to share the art, and then also that it's important to me to also share my thought process on how I create my creative process, so to speak, because I highly value the creative process of other artists. And I find that sometimes way more interesting than the output itself, like than the final work. And if that's something that matters to me, then I should be sharing that sort of behind the scene as we go process. And in some ways, I feel like these voice blogs are the behind the scenes. You are getting a peek into how I'm feeling about life, and then that ultimately informs how I create. So that's just what's been going through my mind lately, and I felt compelled to share as you, the listener, my friend, are tuning in. So thank you so much for hanging around to this very end. As you know where to find me, in linked in the description. I appreciate you so much. As always, don't be a stranger.